and welcome to a semi-special edition of Ben's Junk. The junk that you can measure by the mile. Of videotape, of course. So, in the years that I've been doing archive, I think pretty much every one of my contemporaries, at least here in the US, that has any kind of toe in AV stuff or movies, has done at least one, if not several videos on their video store memories. And I haven't done one of those yet. And of course, being crazy old Benny boy, I'm going to tinker with the formula a little. So the idea behind this one is we did the video rental thing in the Burnett family, of course, just about every Friday afternoon after school. But I was one of those, shock of shocks, kind of nutty kids that would rent the same few movies or video games over and over again. Well, in my case, a fair amount of them would ultimately hit the previously viewed bin, and I would either nag my dad into picking it up, or if it was 25% off day, the price would be so close to that of a rental that he truly didn't care. So let's start with what has to be one of the first, if not the first. Now, nothing says really well-adjusted kid, 8-9-year-old kid, like Saturday Night Live. And you may be thinking, your parents let you check that out? And yeah, my parents were actually pretty cool about that stuff generally. Granted, I never tried to pick up a bloody horror movie or anything like that. But in this case, I'm sure their attitude was, oh yeah, Saturday Night Live, yeah, it's a little older, and oh, Steve Martin, yeah, sure, great, whatever. So what we got here is a 1989 twofer, two very heavily edited episodes of Saturday Night Live from 1978, both hosted by Steve Martin, who had to have been one of the most regular, if not the most regular guest host of that original 75 to 80-ish period. Now, I mentioned edited. So we have two episodes on here clocking in at 110 minutes. But SNL had and still has a 90-minute time slot. And once you factor in commercials, back then I would guess 65 to 75 minutes of actual show. So in this case, we got them down to 55 per episode. So for one, the musical guests are missing. So what would have been my introduction to maybe John Prine or somebody like that didn't happen till a little later. And I suppose I wouldn't have gotten an artist like that back then anyway. So we got this at Blockbuster. And if we had a regular video store at all, it was probably Blockbuster. But we tended to bounce around. So here's my bit of video store memories. We would do most commonly Blockbuster, which wasn't saying much, but there was also a mom and pop place we would go to, or if we needed something from the grocery store, we would rent them at the grocery store, back when grocery stores still did that. And a little later on, there was a Hollywood Video in our neighborhood as well. But this is a Blockbuster special, and say what you will about Blockbuster, but certainly from a 2021 point of view, dating the hell out of this video, it's nice because they would date stamp them when they would put them up for sale. So in this case, we're going back to the spring of 1995 would be when I got this. And I noticed in preparing to do this video that the Blockbuster ephemera is starting to rot. So I'm sure somebody sees that as poetic somehow. Actually, I probably do myself. So anyway, yeah, there was one. And I haven't put in any of these tapes. I'd be willing to bet some of these are unplayable at this point, because after I did get this, I watched it about 1 million times. And so this may very well just be snow at this point. The only reason I've held on to this is because sentimental value. I mean, I've got the early seasons of SNL on DVD now, so yeah. And over the years, I think I've become more of an SCTV person anyway. Now, this next one has a bit of a story tied to it. So, like every good, 8, 9-year-old boy, I loved Weird Al Yankovic. And I still listen to him a little. I have most of his albums kicking around in some way, shape, or form. I've only got a few of his songs on my iPod, though, but he's one of those artists that's never completely gone out of my sphere. And on those rare occasions he makes an album anymore, I still pick it up. But as I mentioned, there was a bit of a story to this. So what we got here is a compilation of his music videos from his proper debut in '83, I think, up through, what was that album called? The Nirvana Nevermind parody, Off the Deep End, which would have been '92. Well, the tape says it's '92. But anyway, the story behind this one was, of course, I would check this out quite a bit, but it was just before Christmas, and we were coming up actually here to Sioux Falls to visit for the holidays. And coming from Denver, once you factor in the time change, if you're driving, it's about 13 hours. And so you have to get going pretty early in the morning if you don't want to make it a 2-day trip or just arrive at some really horrible hour. So the plan was we had rented videos. I guess we had been out of school and stuff for at least a couple of days by that point. And we rented some movies, and we were going to just swing by Blockbuster and drop them off before we left. And for whatever reason, it never happened. And so when we got back after the holidays, my parents didn't have cell phones yet. This would have been 1993, 94. We came home to an answering machine full of Blockbuster messages saying, "You haven't returned your tapes." So my dad, in a pretty serious huff, started looking around because, of course, we'd all forgotten about it by then. And he found the tapes. They must have slid under the seats very early on in the trip. Found them, went down to Blockbuster, and I guess the clerk said, "You know, with regards to this Weird Al tape, for what you owe in late fees, we'll just sell you the tape for its regular list price, because that's going to be a better deal." So I got a little extra Christmas present out of it, and one that I should probably rewind. Now, speaking of Weird Al, the first mockumentary I ever saw was The Complete Al. And this is not the one that I used to check out. I found this in some thrift store bin many years later, but also several years before it came out on DVD. And so I knew it was a joke back then, don't get me wrong. And I thought it was a very funny joke. I thought it was a really good one. I didn't find out till later on there was a book tied to this as well. But the truly funny thing about this is, for the longest time, this was one of my prized tapes because this was out of print and it fetched a good amount on the collector's market for a while there. But of course, it's now on DVD, I think on Blu-ray as well, and streaming. And I have not picked up the reissue. Funny how life works. So, as a kid, one of my favorite movies, and this is truly in the upper echelon of my favorite movies as a kid, and still one I really love, it would have been The Naked Gun with Leslie Nielsen. So I devoured any kind of Naked Gun related thing I could find. So, of course, there were plenty of these tapes kicking around at the time, Police Squad, because Naked Gun was based on the short-lived TV show. I think it lasted all of 6 episodes. Actually, I know it did. And I've got these on, actually, Laserdisc now, even though they've been on DVD. I think the Laserdisc ones are uncut. I'm not positive. But I just, like I said, I devoured any Naked Gun stuff I could find. I just thought it was the funniest thing ever. Now, I checked these TV series episodes out quite a bit. I didn't like them as much as the movies, but there was something about them, and they were, in a way, weirdly kind of more dense than the movies. You had to, you could rewatch these over and over again and get something completely different out of it every time. In a way, it's maybe like a Faulty Towers or something like that. So anyway, this was one of those Blockbuster ones. So if I can get a shot of that date, March of 1996. And I don't remember if this really ever was 1998. I think it may have been marked down right out of the gate. I think it might have been one of those deals where their system priced it, and then the person at the store said, we're not going to get $20 for this. You could go buy it new for that. So anyway, there's that. And since we're talking the Naked Gun here, bit of a linkage thing going on tonight. Naked Gun, 33 1/3, The Final Insult. And I absolutely loved the first movie. I did not get the second one at all. Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear. And amazingly, I've only ever bought the first Naked Gun movie on DVD. The second one I only have on the Philips CDI format. And I think it's early enough that it is truly the CDI format, not the video CDs. But I thought it redeemed itself with the final one, The Final Insult. And I don't remember the circumstances around this, but I checked it out a bunch of times. I'd imagine this was actually available for purchase for the usual $20 or $25 at the time, but maybe not. And so, bottom line, I checked this one out quite a bit, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. But it took until, when was this, 1996... another blockbuster special here, to find its way to the previously viewed bin. And you're probably noticing a pattern here. So moving on, I may lose some comedy cred for this, but I lose my credibility for all sorts of things all the time, and I always get it back. So I loved the Three Stooges as a kid, and you know what? I still enjoy the Three Stooges. As many directions as my comedy tastes have gone in over the years, I still like me some Stooges. And if I happen to pass it on MeTV or something, a lot of times I will at least just leave it on while I do other things. And I built up a whole ton of their tapes. I suppose I should just show this to give you something to look at. But I built up a ton of their tapes, and I now have a U-Haul book box full of just Stooges on VHS. And I had more. I sold some of them off back before they found their way to DVD, or at least in that time period where some of it was on DVD, but you couldn't get the whole set. So even though I have the complete box set of the Stooges stuff now, I've held on to those tapes just because I just can't bring myself to get rid of them. Now, this was not a rental. This is a later reissue of this particular one, but this was first out in 1984, I believe, 84, 85. And the reason I latched onto this particular set was not because of the shorts on here. I couldn't have cared less, but there was a music video for the song The Curly Shuffle by the Jump in the Saddle Band, which was a top 10 hit back in 1984. You may not know that now. I'm sure a lot of our younger viewers have never heard it. It probably hasn't been played on the radio since the mid-'80s, but it was this weird fluke novelty hit, Texas Swing, of all things, to become a hit right in the middle of Michael Jackson and Madonna and Duran Duran and all that. So I would check this particular volume out. It had a whole different artwork to it. Just for that video. I don't know why I liked that song or even the video. The video is just clips from the shorts. There was nothing new to the music video. And perversely, years later, when I got a CED player, one of the titles I fleabaged when I was trying to accrue a few CEDs was the CED equivalent to this one. It skips like crazy. You can't really enjoy the music video or anything. But yeah, this was purchased probably at Media Play, probably in the late 90s. This particular issue is from 93, so it had been kicking around on the market for a while. So yeah, and I used to do that. Let me go on a little tangent here. So sometimes there would be things before the movie that I just really liked, better than the movie. One that stands out in my mind was The Never-Ending Story 2. I couldn't have cared less about the movie, but it had a great Bugs Bunny cartoon on the VHS tape. Or the Michael Keaton Batman, the one from the late 80s. And it had this extended commercial for Warner Brothers merchandise. And I couldn't have cared less about the Batman movie or even the Warner merchandise, but it was such a well put together commercial that I would just watch it time and again. So, yeah, tangent over. So now we get on to the only two kids tapes, I guess you could say. And this is really only the really proper kids tape. The Great Bear Scare, featuring the voice of Tom Smothers, the Yo-Yo Man. Because that's all the memesters are ever going to know Tommy Smothers for, unfortunately. It just can't seem to get anyone interested in the Smothers Brothers at this point. And it's a shame, because at least as am I making this, they're both, still around. So anyway, I actually didn't care much for this. And this was not a rental. This is one I found at Goodwill years later. But, the cartoon was okay. I could have taken it or left it. But in a very early episode of Oddity Archive, I talked about sometimes after the show was over on some, especially kids' tapes, if they had maybe an hour video or a 90-minute video, but a much shorter program, they would pad it out with a bunch of public domain cartoons. Now, the one I repeatedly checked out from the video store featured a whole bunch of Popeye cartoons. I think it may have only been Popeye cartoons. Definitely Fleischer stuff. But I liked Popeye well enough. And so I would get it more for, one, those cartoons, but also just because since it wasn't, I don't remember it being listed on the package anywhere. Of course, he went to the video store and it would be a totally separate clamshell sort of thing. But I guess maybe I thought it was just my little secret. So again, this is one of those things that's really just for sentimental reasons. The one time I tried to watch this, as I mentioned, the cartoons, the extra cartoons are not on this issue. But I was kind of underwhelmed by this, looking at it as an adult. Now, the next one, some would debate whether or not it's kids stuff or not. At the time, it was not considered kids stuff because you'd think back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, a lot of times you'd go to the movies and you'd get a cartoon and a newsreel and such before the main feature. And a lot of those Warner Brothers and MGM cartoons were really made more with adults in mind. But over the years, they started to get marketed more towards kids, and newer ones were made for kids, and they would find their way to the kids section. So something that's really shaped my sense of humor over the years has been Droopy. And I checked this thing out like crazy. So I never did catch it when it hit the previously viewed. It was a Blockbuster special, but I picked this up years later in high school as VHS was really going away. I know I got this at Media Play, and it was as they were closing out VHSs, and I think it was marked down to like $4.99. But I've amazingly kept this in mostly good shape. I had to try and get that sticker off. And if you want to talk about nostalgic logos, some of that old MGM home video stuff kind of gets me going. But this is home to probably my favorite single cartoon ever. Single reel, one reel, two reel, however you want to look at it. Shorter than 20 minutes. And that would be Dumbhounded, which I believe is the first Droopy short. I mean, to me, every frame of that is just one wonderful gag. And I mean, I've got the whole Droopy set on DVD now and uncut. These things were cut down at the time to, appease the politically correct crowd, because occasionally there'd be a joke where maybe something would blow up in a character's face and it would look like that character was in blackface afterwards. So maybe, to me, not offensive. I'm sure it offends somebody. Everything offends somebody anymore. But That's not why I loved it. I just loved how zany it was. I mean, like in Dumbhounded, the chase got so out of control because most of it was a chase sequence with Droopy playing the detective hound, bloodhound, chasing the wolf, because the wolf was always the bad guy, and they would literally run right off the film, and you'd see the sprockets on the side of the film. So yeah, this has been replaced. I have the other MGM Droopy VHS stuff as well, but I don't need it. I've got it replaced and got it in better shape and more complete now, but I absolutely cannot bring myself to get rid of this. So I used to watch on weeknights when I could get away with it, the Family Channel. And I remember it was Johnny Carson and Carol Burnett. And it was just these half-hour best of things. And the Carol Burnett and Friends thing is still on. I've seen it on either MeTV or Antenna TV. And so when I saw this at the video store, I thought, oh, great, I can see some of it for myself. And I checked this one out a bunch of times. It's just a few stray sketches from the Carol Burnett show. But, and most of this has found its way to DVD too. But it is home to my personal favorite, and I think a lot of people's favorite Carol Burnett sketch, and that would be Went with the Wind, which was a parody of Gone with the Wind, which is home to quite possibly one of the best / worst visual gags and lines. It's after the war, the plantation is destroyed, and Scarlett, or I think they called her Starlet in the sketch, made her own dress out of the curtains from the home, and she didn't take the rod out, so she had these real artificially long shoulders. And of course, Rhett Butler's equivalent character comes in and says, "That's a wonderful dress. Where'd you find it?" "Oh, I saw it in the window and I had to have it." Maybe it doesn't sound like much coming out of me, but if you've ever seen the sketch, it's just one of those things that is so it's simultaneously brilliant and awful that you just have to laugh at it. And there's some really excellent sketches on here. And this was a Goodwill find or equivalent, and I actually left the receipt in here, unique. Okay, so I think there's 1 or 2 visits to Unique on the early archive thrifting episodes, but I purchased this in September of 2013 for the princely sum of, what was it, 75 cents? 74 cents. On 25% off day, no less. Okay, since we're on Carol Burnett kick, 2 of the cast members on the Carol Burnett show were Harvey Korman and Tim Conway. So my favorite, when we would go to King Soopers, the grocery store, the Colorado, Denver equivalent of Kroger, was The Long Shot. And yes, this is the tape. And this tape is snow at this point. This should have gone to the trash a really, really long time ago. I watched this sucker right into the ground, which is such a strange thing because I would have been 11. And so the story is really just more of an excuse for gags, but it's Harvey Korman and Tim Conway trying to concoct a way to make money by gambling and trying to do some shenanigans around horse racing. And of course, they play complete morons. And of course, you know, you can kind of predict what happens. And for our Eddie Deason fans, he has a cameo as a valet in here as well. Now, if you, speaking of archive thrifting, if you watch that show, not too long ago, I found this on DVD. And the DVD is out of print. And last I checked, fetches more than it would have been just purchasing it new at the time. So, of course, I just pounced on it. But I still have just this strange soft spot for this beaten up, cut up tape. And at one point I thought I had actually tossed it or given it to Goodwill, but as it turns out, I didn't. And I'm glad I didn't. So even if this is unplayable, it's still just kind of one of those things that means something to me, and if perhaps a bit dusty. So anyway, that is it. Those are my 10 tapes. Now, I mentioned video games earlier. I only ever purchased one from the previously viewed, and it was not one of my regulars. It was Caesar's Palace for the Sega Genesis. I still have it, but I'm not going to show it here. I know I've showed it actually at one point on here. I think it was the first time I tried to do a video game thing. But anyway, so this was my little equivalent to the whole video store memories thing. And who knows if it was a success or not. It was nice for me. So that's it for today, or actually tonight. I'll talk to you again soon.